Prologue: The Descent. You do not arrive in the kingdom of Cooter. You descend into it. The transition is geological as much as it is spiritual. You leave the paved geometry of the city, where the homeowners associations maintain their lawns with a vigilance bordering on the fascistic, and you turn west off Hancock Road. The elevation drops. The soil changes from the respectable sandy loam of the uplands to a darker, more adhesive substance known locally as gumbo mud. This is not merely dirt. It is a geologic adhesive that has claimed the boots of French trappers, timber barons, and at least one door-to-door evangelist who made the mistake of parking his sedan too close to the culvert. We are situated in the westernmost reaches of Egypt Township, Ashley County, Arkansas. To our north lies the G.P. Lake, a body of water that owes its existence to industrial ambition and its peculiar nocturnal luminescence to what Papa calls heavy minerals. To our south runs the Marais-Salane Road, a name that suggests a romantic French history, but in practice is mostly just a place where teenagers go to get stuck in four-wheel drives. Between these two boundaries lies the farm. It is 40 acres of mild chaos held together by rusted fencing and the sheer force of personality of a rooster named General Beauregard. History tells us that this land was once the domain of the Crossett Lumber Company. They say Cap Gates tamed this wilderness with steam engines and payroll ledgers. They say the mill whistle used to be the voice of God in this county, signaling when to wake, when to eat, and when to rest. That whistle is silent now. The steam engines are scrap. The company town is dissolved into a normal town with normal problems like zoning laws and the price of diesel. But down here in the bottomlands, the vacuum of authority did not last long. The silence was filled. If you stand on the porch of reckoning at 5 a.m., you will hear it. It is not the mechanical shriek of a steam whistle. It is a biological declaration of war against the silence. It is the general announcing to the solar system that he has permitted the sun to rise for one more day, provided the insects are plentiful and the Christmas bonus is paid on time. We do not operate on Central Standard Time here. We operate on rooster time. The circadian rhythm of this farm is shot to hell, replaced by the whims of a bird who believes he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 agricultural conglomerate. It is a ridiculous way to live. I'm aware of this. I have a degree. I have read books that do not feature livestock. And yet when the fog rolls off the Saline River and smells of hay and heartbreak, I find myself checking the tin for the rattle of corn. I find myself waiting for the donkey to freeze. I find myself looking at the chicken-shaped pool, a 1-acre testament to hydrological hubris that is currently leaking at the beak end, and thinking that it looks, in the half-light, almost like a cathedral. You do not arrive here. You fall in. And once the mud has your boots, you might as well stay for the eggs.
Chapter 1. The Geometry of Mud. The mud in western Egypt Township does not behave like standard geological matter. It does not merely dirty your boots, it negotiates with them. It is a dark, saline gumbo, composed of equal parts alluvial silt and ancient resentment, possessing a suction force that defies the laws of physics and suggests a personal grudge against locomotion. French trappers 200 years ago noted this quality in their journals, often using the phrase merde calant, which I'm told translates loosely to sticky doom. Later, the surveyors for the Crossett Lumber Company arrived with their tripods and steam engines, intent on imposing a grid of steam and geometry upon the chaos of the bottoms. They built their trams, they cut the great pines, and they drained what they could. But eventually, the trams rusted, the steam dissipated, and the mud reclaimed its sovereignty. We live in the compromise zone. Our specific coordinates are north of the Marais-Salines Road, where the ghost of a French boot is likely still preserved in a clay, and south of the GP Lake, which glows on Tuesday nights due to what Papa describes as industrial enthusiasm. I was standing near the deep end of the chicken-shaped pool when the trouble began. It is necessary for the record to describe the pool. It is not a metaphor. It is a concrete reality, poured in 1982 during a flush year for soybeans. It is 60 feet long and shaped with painstaking anatomical precision like the side profile of a rooster. There is a shallow end for the beak, a widening slope for the breast, and a deep, diving-capable section for the tail feathers. It is a monument to hydrological hubris. It is also, currently, leaking at the beak. I was attempting to patch a hairline fracture in the wattle with a bucket of hydraulic cement when the sound rolled across the delta. It was a low, vibratory thrum like a bass note played on a cello made of corrugated tin. To the untrained ear, my ear, it sounded like a logging truck downshifting on Highway 8, perhaps hitting that washboard section near the county line, or thunder. To General Beauregard, it was the opening salvo of World War III. The general was perched on the rim of the pool near the dorsal feathers. He is a red jungle fowl of significant carriage, possessing feathers that color a burnished copper and a stare that suggests he's read Machiavelli and found it too soft. He wears pinned to his chest feathers a plastic Big Chief pin he acquired from a kindergartner in a skirmish I prefer not to document. When the rumble hit, the general did not flinch. He elongated. His neck extended like a periscope. He rotated his head 5 degrees to the northwest. "Do you hear it?" I asked. "Sounds like rain." The general made a sound low in his throat. It was not a cluck. It was a tactical assessment. "Cur-de-tuck." "It's just a truck, General, probably hauling pine to the mill." He looked at me with profound pity. In his eyes, I am not a keeper of livestock. I'm a hopelessly naive middle manager in an organization under siege. He hopped down from the concrete coping and began to pace the pool deck. This was not a casual stroll. It was the frantic, jerky gait of a CEO who has just discovered a hostile takeover bid in the morning papers. He stopped, scratched the concrete violently, and looked northwest again, toward Bradley County, toward Warren. "The pink orb," the general murmured, or rather, he clucked it, but the inflection was unmistakable. "The pink orb moves." I sighed. "We're not doing this today. I have to fix the wattle." But the atmosphere had already shifted. The air, previously thick with the standard humidity of the Ouachita bottoms, suddenly took on a different weight. It smelled of ozone and wet dog. I looked up toward the house. The prophecy of the general, a verbal contract we had all inadvertently signed by living here, states that the return or the departure, the theology is vague, will be preceded by 4 specific atmospheric conditions. I checked the tin shed. A sudden gust of wind rattled the corrugated metal against the frame. The corn rattles in the tin? Check. I looked at the porch of reckoning. Memo was sitting in her hickory rocker, staring at a spot of rust on the screen door. She let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Memo sighs. Check. I looked at the pasture. Bronky the donkey, wearing his signature red bandana, was standing by the fence. He was not grazing. He was not swishing flies. He was frozen, staring at the same invisible point on the horizon as the general. Bronky won't move. Check. My stomach tightened. That was 3. The 4th sign was the clincher. When okra grunts 3 times and the wind smells like hay and heartbreak. I looked toward the pig pen of mystery. Okra,
Our sow of indeterminate lineage and terrible disposition was standing by our trough. She lifted her snout. "Grunt!" The general froze, one foot raised. "Grunt!" We waited. The wind shifted. It blew in from the river, carrying the scent of damp fescue and that specific melancholic odor of old barns that have fallen in on themselves. Hay and heartbreak. We needed the third grunt. The theology demanded it. The general leaned forward, his beak open, willing the sound into existence. I found myself gripping the trowel. If she grunted, we were leaving. That was the rule. Ochre looked at the general. She looked at me. She looked at the bucket of hydraulic cement. She sneezed. It was not a grunt. It was a dismissal. She turned her massive, bristled fat to us and lay down in the mud. The prophecy stalled. The general let out a squawk of pure, unadulterated outrage. He flew at the chain-link fence, spurring the wire. He screamed at the pig. He screamed at the sky. He screamed at the logging truck, which was now fading into the distance. "It is a delay," he seemed to shout, "a tactical delay by the tomato warlord." I dropped the trowel into the bucket. The cement was hardening. The wattle was still leaking. The prophecy had failed, or at least paused, leaving us in the most dangerous state possible for a South Gothic narrative, the anticipation of trouble without the release of disaster. "Come down off the fence, General," I said, wiping the mud from my hands. "She didn't grunt. We're not going to Warren." The general dropped to the ground. He adjusted his big chief pin with his beak. He looked at me, and then he looked northwest, his eyes hard and unblinking. He knew what I didn't. The truck wasn't just a truck, and the silence from the pig wasn't peace. It was just the reload time. Chapter 2. The Cabinet of Feathers. The War Council convened at 6:15 a.m. behind the shimmering, leaking expanse of the chicken-shaped pool. In military histories, great campaigns are often plotted in tents of silk or bunkers of reinforced concrete. Ours was plotted on an overturned cable spool near the compost heap, utilizing a grease-stained paper placemat from the Catfish Barn in Hamburg. General Beauregard stood in the center of the spool. He had recovered his composure after the pig's refusal to grunt. He was no longer emotional. He was now purely logistical. He paced the circumference of the spool, his talons tricking a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like a telegraph transmission. The cabinet was in attendance. To the general's left stood Bronchi, the donkey. He was wearing his red bandana, which had been freshly ironed, by me, the night before. Bronchi serves as the general's heavy infantry and moral compass. He does not speak, but he chews with a rhythmic intensity that suggests he is contemplating the darker aspects of Kantian ethics. To the general's right lay Ochre, the pig. She was asleep. This was her standard contribution to strategic planning. I stood at the rear, holding a thermos of coffee and a distinct sense of impending financial ruin. "Gentlemen," the general did not say, but clearly implied by the sharp tilt of his comb, "the optical reconnaissance is confirmed. The rumble we heard yesterday was not a truck. It was the mobilization of the tomato warlord." He pecked the placemat. Specifically, he pecked a ketchup stain near the upper left corner, just above the advertisement for affordable bail bonds. "Here," the general indicated, "Bradley County, the seat of the Red Orb." I leaned in. "General, that is a stain from a hush puppy, and technically, if this map is to scale, you're declaring war on a discount tire shop in Wilmot." The general ignored me. He viewed geography not as a fixed science, but as a canvas for his destiny. He fluffed his hackles, expanding his physical volume by 30%, a technique known in corporate boardrooms as asserting dominance, and in the barnyard as looking like a pine cone. The hens of Warren are crying out for liberation. They are shackled to the vine. They are forced to worship the fruit that bleeds. We must launch a preemptive strike before the festival commences. I sighed and took a sip of coffee. I knew about the Pink Tomato Festival. It was a charming regional event featuring a parade, a pageant, and a tomato-eating contest. To the general, however, it was a pagan ritual designed to mock the sun. He believed the tomato was a false sun, red, round, and silent, and that its popularity was a direct insult to his own solar authority. General, I said, even if I agreed that the tomatoes are plotting against us, which I don't, we have a logistics problem. We have no transport, the truck needs a starter solenoid, the trailer has a flat, and we have no operating capital. The general stopped pacing. He looked at me. He looked at the house, specifically at the foundation of the chimney. He gave a low, conspiratorial cluck. The reserve! My stomach dropped. No, absolutely not! Papa will kill us! The general hopped down from the spool and marched toward the house. Bronchi followed, his ears swiveling like radar dishes. Even Oak Rope in one eye, sensing that the conversation had shifted from geopolitics to food or money. The porch of reckoning is carved from hickory and skepticism. It is the domain of Memaw, my grandmother, a woman who regards the modern world as a passing fad that has taken too long to blow over. She was sitting in her rocker, snapping beans into a colander. She did not look up as the procession, a rooster, a donkey, and a man with a shovel, approached the flower bed near the chimney. "You digging up the begonias?" she stated. It wasn't a question. "I'm digging up the reserve, Memaw," I said, positioning the shovel. "The general believes we need to finance an expedition to Warren." Memaw paused. She looked at the rooster. The general stood at attention, saluting her with a stiff wing. Memaw and the general had a complex relationship. She thought he was insane, and he thought she was the Empress Dowager of the plantation. "Warren," Memaw said, tasting the word like it was a piece of gristle. "Ain't nothing in Warren but dust and speeding tickets, and that tomato thing." "Exactly," I said, striking the earth. "He wants to fight the tomato." "Well," Memaw resumed, snapping beans, "better him than me. Watch out for the root system. Papa buried that jar in '98. The wisteria has likely claimed it." Papa, the land king, didn't believe in banks. He believed the Federal Reserve was a house of cards built on a swamp of lies. Consequently, he instituted the Christmas bonus policy. Every December, he buried a mason jar containing exactly $1,000 for every year of my age. I was 33. I hit glass on the third strike. I cleared away the dirt, which was dark and smelled of worms and old money. I pulled out the jar. It was a ball, wide-mouthed quart jar sealed with beeswax. Inside, the rolls of 20s looked like pickled cucumbers. $33,000, I whispered, to fight a vegetable. The general crowed softly. It was a sound of immense satisfaction. He walked over to the jar and tapped the glass with his beak. Funds secured. "You know," Memaw said from the porch, her rocker creaking, a rhythmic counterpoint to the general's tapping, "if you go to Warren, you have to cross the river. And the river ain't right lately. I heard the bridge humming yesterday, humming like it forgot the words to the song." I looked at her. The bridge is made of concrete and steel, Memaw. It doesn't hum." "Everything hums if you listen close enough," she said, "especially things that are trying to hold back the water. You take that bird to Warren, he's going to end up on a sandwich if you ain't careful. Or worse." "Worse?" "He might win," she said. She threw a bean into the colander with violence. I looked at the jar in my hand. I looked at the general, who was now instructing Bronchi on the proper loading order of the truck bed. "We're not going to win, Memaw," I said. "We're going to drive to the county line, eat a gas station burrito, get scared by thunderstorms, and come home. It's a tactical exercise." Memaw stopped rocking. She looked me dead in the eye. "You descend into the bottom, boy. You don't just drive through it. You tell the general to pack his spurs, and you," she pointed a bean at me, "you pack a flashlight. The dark gets heavy past the river." I nodded. I didn't know what she meant, but in the Cooter frequency, you don't ask for clarifications. You just check your batteries. "Yes, ma'am," I said. I turned back to the general. "All right, we have the funding, we have the map, but we're not leaving until the pig grunts. That's the deal." The general looked at the pig pen. Okra was still asleep. He looked back at me and winked. It was terrifying. Chapter 3. The Prophetic Grunt. We spent the next 4 hours in a state of theological gridlock. According to the unwritten but strictly enforced bylaws of the Cooter farm, the expeditionary force could not cross the cattle guard until the prophecy of the general was ratified in triplicate. We had the rattle of corn, chapter 1. We had the sigh of Memo, chapter 1. We had the frozen donkey, chapter 1. But we remained one grunt short of a quorum. The sun climbed high over Egypt Township, turning the mud in the pig pen into a fragrant, steaming crust. The humidity rose to a level that felt less like weather and more like a personal insult. It was the kind of heat that makes barbed wire sag and causes Baptists to reconsider the concept of free will. Okra lay in the center of her pen, a massive, bristled island of porcine indifference. She was not sleeping. She was withholding. The general paced the fence line. He was vibrating. Every few minutes he would stop, glare at the pig, and emit a low, strangled sound that I translated as, "This is a violation of the Geneva Convention." I sat on the tailgate of the truck, sweating through my shirt. Bronchi stood in the shade of the pecan tree, staring at the pig with the intense, non-judgmental patience that only donkeys and seasoned public defenders possessed. "She ain't going to do it, General," I said, fanning myself with the crumpled map of Warren. "She's waiting for a bribe. It's a labor dispute. Throw her a cantaloupe and let's go." The general turned on me, his eyes flashing. He ruffled his neck feathers. "Corruption," his posture screamed. "The revolution cannot be bought with melons. The oracle must speak freely." The oracle is a 300-pound sow named after a slimy vegetable. She doesn't care about the revolution. She cares about carbohydrates. The general ignored me. He turned his gaze back to the northwest. And then the light changed. It happened all at once. One moment the sky was bleached and oppressive white. The next it bruised. A heavy purple tint bled into the horizon. Not the gray of a storm, but the deep, violent violet of a fresh bruise, or if you were a paranoid rooster, the color of a ripe plum tomato. The air pressure dropped so fast my ears popped. The cicadas, who had been screaming at a steady 90 decibels, cut out instantly. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the saline silence, the kind that rolls off the river when the water remembers things it shouldn't. The general went rigid. He looked at the purple sky. He looked at the pig. He looked at me. They are weaponizing the atmosphere, he seemed to say. Then the wind hit. It did not come from the north. It came from everywhere at once. It whipped through the yard, picking up dust and dead leaves. It rattled the tin roof of the shed with a sound like chattering teeth. But it was the smell that froze me. It didn't smell like rain. It smelled of ozone and sulfur, of wet wool and old river mud. It smelled like the inside of a trunk that hadn't been opened since 1902. It was the hay and heartbreak, exactly as the prophecy foretold, but with an undercurrent of something else, something ancient and rot sweet. The thin place was opening. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I looked at Bronchi. The donkey had shifted. He was no longer looking at the pig. He was looking at the air above the pig, his ears swiveled forward, listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. In the center of the pen, Okra stood up. She did not struggle to her feet. She rose with a terrifying, fluid grace that shouldn't have been possible for an animal of her density. She lifted her snout toward the purple sky. Her eyes, usually small and beady, seemed to catch the strange violet light. The general stopped pacing. He bowed his head. He knew. Okra opened her mouth. Grunt. It was low, resonant, vibrating in the hollow of my chest. The wind swirled faster. A piece of newspaper, the Ashley County Ledger, flew past my head. Grunt! The second one was louder, a percussive bark that echoed off the barn. The sky seemed to tighten. The purple deepened to black. The general closed his eyes, accepting the mandate. Okra looked directly at the general. She didn't look like a pig anymore. She looked like a priestess of the mud, delivering a verdict from the earth itself. Grunt! The third sound cracked the air like a gunshot. The wind died instantly. The purple faded from the sky, leaving a dull, anxious gray. The smell of sulfur lingered for a second, then vanished, replaced with the smell of pig manure and diesel. The prophecy was sealed. Okra immediately collapsed back into the mud and closed her eyes, her duty discharged. The general stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then he exploded. He flew to the top of the fence post. He threw his head back. He expanded his chest until the big chief pin threatened to pop off. Cock-a-doodle-doo! It was a war cry. It was a scream of defiance. It was a notification to the universe that the theological paperwork was filed and the invasion was on. He hopped down, marched to the truck, and jumped in the passenger seat. He looked at me through the windshield, tapping his beak on the glass. "Drive," he commanded. "The orb awaits." I looked at Bronchi. The donkey walked over to the trailer and loaded himself. I looked at the sky. It was normal again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of that purple light. I couldn't shake the smell of that old mud. Memo came out onto the porch. She was wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at the truck, then at the sky. "Did she grunt?" I said. "3 times, and the sky turned purple." Memo nodded, unimpressed. "That'll happen. Salene's restless. You got the flashlight?" "I got the flashlight." "Then get gone before the pig changes her mind." I turned the key. The truck coughed, shuddered, and caught. The general settled onto his dashboard perch. I put it in gear, and we rolled toward the cattle guard, leaving the safety of the mud for the uncertainty of the road.
Chapter 4. Packing the Caisson. The mobilization of an army is usually a matter of grand strategy. The mobilization of a rooster, a donkey, and a pig for an interstate offensive is a matter of bungee cords and negotiation. The vehicle chosen for the invasion was my 1994 Ford F-150. It is a truck of noble lineage and questionable suspension, possessing a shade of green paint that Ford called deep emerald, but which the local sun has bleached to algae surprise. It has 214,000 miles on the odometer and a glove box that opens only when you hit a pothole at exactly 40 miles per hour. The general, having descended from his adrenaline high, was now in the logistics phase. He stood on the hood of the truck, supervising the loading of the caisson, the rusted trailer, with the critical eye of a quartermaster who suspects embezzlement. "We need the heavy ordnance," he clucked at me. "I'm packing the Vienna sausages, General," I said. "Relax." The inventory for the Warren campaign was specific. I'd compiled it on the back of the same grease-stained placemat, right below the ketchup stain. A proper expedition into the Arkansas timberlands requires a precise balance of survival gear and snacks. I loaded the following items into the truck bed. 3 cans of Armour Vienna sausages, original flavor. The general finds the smoked variety pretentious. A coil of baling wire, the duct tape of the agrarian South. A 1974 SO road map of Arkansas, on which Warren is marked, but Interstate 530 is a hopeful dotted line. A stick for poking things. Hickory, 3 feet long, seasoned. A flashlight with batteries that I hoped were not corroded. 2 gallons of distilled water for the radiator or the donkey, whichever overheated first. The mason jar containing $33,000 in damp 20s. "The command perch," the general reminded me, tapping on the windshield. "I'm getting to it." I retrieved the arc welder from the shed. The general demanded a forward observation post. He refused to ride in a crate like common poultry. "A leader leads from the front," he had intimated, or at least from the dashboard. I welded a T-bar of scrap rebar to a clamp and affixed it to the passenger side dashboard. I wrapped the crossbar in vet wrap for grip. It looked like a parrot stand designed by a Soviet engineer, but the general hopped onto it, gripped it with his talons, and bobbed his head in approval. "Adequate," he signaled. "Visibility is optimal." The real crisis, however, was the heavy infantry. Bronky the donkey was standing by the trailer ramp. He was wearing his red bandana, but he looked miserable. He refused to step onto the ramp. He planted his hooves in the dirt and gave me a look that said, "I cannot go to war in wrinkled linens." "He isn't moving," I told the general. The general looked at the donkey. He looked at the bandana, which was indeed showing signs of pasture fatigue, wrinkled, dusted with pollen, and slightly skewed to the left. "Disgraceful," he clucked. "A soldier must be crisp." I sighed. I walked back into the house. Mimo was still in the kitchen. She watched as I set up the ironing board. She watched as I plugged in the iron. She watched as I retrieved a red bandana from the neck of a donkey standing in the yard, brought it inside, and laid it out on the board. "You are ironing a bandana," she said. "It's a morale issue, Mimo." "For the donkey?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you have a college degree?" "I do." "Well," she said, turning back to the sink, "use the starch. He likes the crispness." I starched the bandana. I ironed it until the creases were sharp enough to cut cheese. I took it back outside and tied it around Bronky's neck. The effect was immediate. Bronky stood taller. His ears perked up. He looked less like a beast of burden and more like a weary revolutionary poet. He walked up the ramp and into the trailer without a sound. Okra, sensing that the train was leaving the station, loaded herself. This involved her walking up the ramp, lying down in the center of the trailer, and refusing to acknowledge that she was taking up 80% of the floor space. Bronchi sighed and squeezed into the corner. We were almost ready. I was doing a final sweep of the shed when I found it. It was sitting on a high shelf, covered in dust and spider webs. A yellow hard hat, not a modern plastic one, but an old fiberglass model from the 1950s. On the front, faded but legible, was the logo of the Crossett Lumber Company. I took it down. It was heavy. It smelled of pine resin and old sweat. It was a relic of the steam and geometry era, a piece of the empire that Cap Gates built. I brought it out to the truck. The general saw it. His eyes widened. He recognized the symbol. To him, it was not a safety device. It was a crown. It was the helmet of the industrial titans who had shaped the mud before him. "The helmet of state," he cooed. I placed it on the dashboard, next to his perch. He leaned over and rubbed his beak against the yellow fiberglass. He was co-opting the history. He was claiming the legacy of the timber barons for the army of the chicken. "All right, Napoleon," I said, climbing into the driver's seat. "Everyone is crisp. Everyone is loaded. We have sausages." I turned the key. The F-150 roared to life, a sound that was less engine purr and more washing machine full of bolts. The general gripped his perch. Bronchi braced himself in the trailer. I put it in drive, and we rolled over the cattle guard. Clack, 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 and turned on to the gravel. To our left was the swamp. To our right was the piney woods. Ahead of us lay the Marais Salines Road, the bridge, and the long, strange path to Warren. The general looked forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He let out a low, soft crow. "Cock-a-doodle-doo, lock and load." Chapter 5. The Boundary Line. There is a specific feeling to leaving the farm. It's a physical sensation, a shifting of gravity that occurs exactly when the tires leave the compressed dirt of the driveway and hit the washboard gravel of the county road. The truck rattled. The trailer rattled. The general, gripped tightly to his rebar perch on the dashboard, bobbed his head in counter rhythm to the suspension, looking like a bobblehead of a dictator sold in a tourist trap. We turned left onto the Marais Salines Road. To the uninitiated, this is just a strip of gravel connecting the hinterlands of Egypt Township to the slightly more paved hinterlands of North Crossett. To the historian, and to anyone who has tried to pull a tractor out of a ditch here in February, it is a boundary line. Crossing the line of departure, the general signaled with a sharp cluck. He peered through the windshield, scanning the ditch for ambushes. I shifted the truck into third gear. The engine whined, a sound of mechanical protest that I've learned to ignore. "It's called the Marais Salines, General," I shouted over the road noise. "French for salt marsh, or salty pool. Depends on which trapper you ask." The general ignored the etymology. He does not care about the French. He believes they cook poultry with too much wine and not enough reverence. But the history is there, buried under the gravel. 200 years ago, this wasn't a road. It was a trace. French trappers from the Ouachita Post came up here looking for salt licks and beaver pelts. They wore boots made of uncured leather that rotted in the gumbo. They named the water Marais Salines because it tasted brackish, a geological joke played by an ancient ocean that receded and left its salt trapped in the clay. We drove past the scrub oak and the pine thickets. The air coming through the open windows was hot and smelled of dust. Then the trees broke. To our right lay the GP Lake. It's a massive body of water, an industrial reservoir built to serve the thirst of the paper mill miles away.
Unlike the oxbows of the river, which are messy and chaotic, the GP lake feels engineered. The water is too still. It reflects the sky with a flat, hard precision, like a mirror in a motel bathroom. Sector 4, the general murmured, eyeing the water. Naval potential low. Serpent threat high. There are no serpents, General, just catfish. Radioactive catfish, he implied by the way he recalled from the window. The GP Lake has a reputation. The locals claim that on certain moonless nights, the Candle Channel catfish near the intake valve glow with a soft green luminescence. Papa says it's just algae. Mimo says it's industrial enthusiasm. I've never seen a glowing fish, but I have caught a few that looked like they knew the periodic table of elements by heart. We rolled past the levee. A solitary egret stood on a stump, watching us. It did not move. In the cooter worldview, birds are usually spies, but this one just looked bored. That bird is compromised, the general decided. He fluffed his neck feathers, making himself look larger in the windshield, projecting power to the shoreline. We reached the junction of Highway 133. This was the hard seal. The gravel ended. Asphalt began. To turn left was to go back toward the river, toward the ferry that didn't exist anymore. To turn right was to go north, toward Hamburg, toward the timberlands, toward Warren. I stopped at the stop sign. The truck idled rough. "It's the last chance to turn back," I said. "We could go get a slushie and call it a victory." The general looked at me. He looked at the asphalt stretching north, shimmering in the heat haze. He reached down and pecked the yellow cross at lumber hard hat sitting on the dash. "Advance," he ordered. I sighed. I put on my blinker, a gesture of optimism as the bulb had burned out in 2004, and turned right. The tires hummed on the pavement. We picked up speed, 40 miles an hour, 45. The trailer behind us settled into a smoother rhythm. We had crossed the boundary. We were no longer farmers. We were an expeditionary force, moving north into the empire of the pine, heading straight for the heart of the Tomato Republic.